It's the year 1910, and you are a German explorer digging in the sacred groves of a city in West Africa, and you are about to make the discovery of your life, and then completely fail the test that comes with it. Your name is Leo Frobenius. You have crossed oceans and deserts to reach this place, Ile-Ife, the holy city of the Yoruba people, in what is today southwestern Nigeria. Your workmen are digging near an old shrine when a shovel strikes something solid. You kneel. You brush away the red earth, and out of the ground comes a face. A human head, cast in gleaming metal, life-size, and perfect. Not crude, not primitive, not anything you were taught to expect from Africa. The face is serene, symmetrical, breathtakingly lifelike. The cheekbones, the lips, the delicate lines running down the face like rain. It is, you will later write, as beautiful as anything the ancient Greeks ever made. You turn it in your hands as the whole camp goes quiet. And then you, Leo Frobenius, respected European scholar, look at one of the greatest works of art on the African continent, found in the ground of an African holy city, surrounded by the African priests who guard its memory, and you announce to the world that you have discovered Atlantis. Yes, that Atlantis. The made-up sunken island from a Greek philosopher's story. Frobenius told the newspapers, and the newspapers printed it, that this African city must be the lost colony of Poseidon, built by wandering ancient Greeks because the art was simply too good. In his mind, those were the two possibilities. Either a fairy tale continent invented by Plato was real, or Africans were great artists. And he chose the fairy tale. So here's the question that should bother you. We know today, beyond any doubt, who made those heads. African artists in an African city centuries before Frobenius's grandparents were born, working at a level of skill that the European art world would not reach until the Renaissance. The bronzes of Ife now sit in museums on 3 continents, and art historians rank them among the greatest portrait sculpture ever produced by any civilization, anywhere, ever. So why did the man who found them invent a sunken continent rather than believe his own eyes? And why, be honest, have you never heard of Ife? Let's get into it. First, understand where you are, because this city is not just any city. Ile-Ife, in the forest country of southwestern Nigeria, is the sacred heart of the Yoruba world, and the Yoruba are one of the largest and most influential peoples of Africa, tens of millions strong today, with a diaspora that has carried their culture to Brazil, Cuba, and beyond. In Yoruba tradition, Ife is nothing less than the place where the world began. The story goes that the high god sent Oduduwa down from the heavens with a chain, a calabash of sand, and a 5-toed chicken. The sand was poured on the primordial waters, the chicken scratched it into land, and where that first earth formed, that is Ife. Every Yoruba king who matters traces his crown back to this city. Its ruler, the Uni, sits on a throne that tradition counts back dozens of reigns. When you stand in Ife, you are not standing in a ruin. You are standing in a living, holy city. Africa's Jerusalem, Africa's Mecca, still crowned, still worshipping, right now. And 1,000 years ago, this sacred city entered a golden age that would produce some of the finest art in human history. But before we get to the masterpieces, let's rewind even further, because Ife did not come from nowhere, and this channel loves a deep root. 2,500 years ago, while Rome was still a small town quarreling with its neighbors, a culture we now call Nok was flourishing on the plateaus of central Nigeria. We don't know what they called themselves. Nok is just the modern village where their work first surfaced. But what they left behind is astonishing. Life-size terracotta figures, heads with elaborate hairstyles, sweeping brows, pierced eyes, sculpted with a confidence that makes them, by centuries, some of the oldest figurative sculpture in Africa outside Egypt. And alongside the art, iron. The people of the Nok culture were smelting iron in furnaces at a startlingly early date, some of the earliest ironworking anywhere south of the Sahara. If you watched our very first episode, about the African steel masters whose furnaces outperformed Europe's, you already know where that road leads. Sculpture and metal, side by side, in Nigeria, 500 years before the birth of Christ. The lineage is long. Ife is what happens when that lineage matures. So now, the Golden Age. Between roughly the 1100s and the 1400s, Ife became a rich, organized, sacred metropolis. Paved courtyards, city walls, thriving crafts, and a royal court that commissioned art the way Renaissance popes would later commission chapels. And the royal artists of Ife produced the works that would one day short-circuit Leo Frobenius's brain. A series of metal heads, copper and brass, cast in a technique called lost wax, that are simply, flatly, perfect. Let me tell you what perfect means here, because your intuition about ancient art needs recalibrating. Most sacred art, in most of the world, is stylized. Big eyes, symbolic proportions, holy abstraction. Think of medieval European paintings where the baby Jesus looks like a tiny middle-aged accountant. That is what European scholars expected primitive art to be. The Ife heads are the opposite. They are naturalistic portraits, faces so individual, so anatomically exact, that they can only have been modeled on real people. The lips are full and soft. The eyelids fold correctly. The ears, and every sculptor will tell you ears are the hardest, are perfect. Many of the faces carry fine parallel striations, delicate grooves running down the skin like the scarification patterns of living tradition. Some heads have rows of tiny holes along the scalp and jaw, where real hair or beaded veils were once attached. Crowned heads still wear their layered royal regalia, cast in metal down to the last bead. Art historians reach for one comparison again and again. These look like the portrait sculpture of the Italian Renaissance. Except the Renaissance came after. When the master casters of Ife were at work, Donatello's grandparents had not been born. And now the technique, because this is where admiration turns into disbelief. These heads were made by lost wax casting, one of the most demanding processes in all of metalworking. Sculpt the head in wax over a clay core, perfect in every detail. Coat it in layer after layer of fine clay. Fire it. The wax melts and runs out, leaving a head-shaped void thinner than a coin. Then pour molten metal, at over 1,000 degrees, into that fragile darkness. One chance, no second try. If the mold cracks, if the metal cools too fast, if a single air bubble lodges in the face, months of work are gone. The casters of Ife did this again and again, in castings so thin and so flawless that modern metallurgists study them with genuine professional respect. No Greek helped. No Egyptian helped. No Atlantean swam up with tips. West African artists, working for West African kings, solved one of metallurgy's hardest problems, and then made it look easy. And metal was only half of Ife's genius. Here's a fact that deserves to be famous. Archaeologists digging at a site in Ife called Igbo Olokun found the remains of glass workshops, crucibles, furnaces, and tens of thousands of glass beads. For a long time, everyone assumed the glass was imported and merely remelted. Then chemists actually analyzed it. The composition, rich in lime and alumina, matched no glass from Europe, no glass from the Islamic world, no glass from anywhere else on Earth. It was its own recipe, made from local materials. Ife had independently invented glassmaking, one of only a handful of places on the planet ever to do so, and its blue and green beads traveled the trade routes of West Africa for centuries as treasure. When we told you about Mansa Musa's Golden Empire and the desert roads of Timbuktu, those roads carried Ife glass. This one city was a fine art capital and a high-tech materials lab at the same time. So that is what Leo Frobenius was actually holding in 1910. The product of a 1,000-year-old African tradition of sculpture, metallurgy, and chemistry, made in the sacred capital of one of Africa's great civilizations. And he said, Atlantis. Now let's be fair to the record and precise about the man, because honest history is the rule here. Frobenius was not a cartoon villain. He was one of the most energetic collectors of African culture of his era. He genuinely loved the continent, recorded its stories, and later African thinkers even quoted him approvingly when he wrote that African civilization was real and deep. But standing in that grove with a masterpiece in his hands, he could not clear the lowest bar of all, believing that the Africans in front of him were the heirs of the people who made it. He spun his Atlantis theory to the world's press. He tried to buy and carry off sacred heads for a museum back home. Colonial authorities actually stopped him and made him give some back. And his sunken continent fantasy collapsed within his own lifetime, as more heads came out of the ground of Ife itself. Most famously in the 1930s, when workmen digging house foundations near the palace uncovered a whole trove of them, a royal gallery sleeping under a courtyard. No Atlantis. Just Ife, being Ife, all the way down. You have heard this reflex before on this channel. When Europeans saw the stone walls of Great Zimbabwe, they invented Phoenician builders. When they saw the carved churches of Lalibela, they credited the Knights Templar. When they saw the bronzes of Benin, and hold that thought, because Benin is part of this family, they argued for wandering Portuguese. And when they saw the faces of Ife, they reached past the living civilization in front of them, all the way to a Greek fable about a drowned island. The pattern is always the same. The evidence is African. The explanation is anything but. It is the most consistent failed exam in the history of scholarship, and Africa keeps grading it with new discoveries. And here is the twist that makes Ife's case even sweeter. The story didn't end in Ife. It multiplied. Yoruba tradition, and the traditions of neighboring kingdoms, remember Ife as the mother of crowns, the place other royal lines came from. The Kingdom of Benin, whose magnificent bronzes stunned Europe in 1897, you watched that episode, preserves a tradition that its casting knowledge came from Ife, that long ago, an Oba of Benin sent to the Uni of Ife for a master caster, and a man named Igwega came and taught the craft that became the Benin bronzes. Whatever the exact history behind the tradition, the artistic family tree is real, and its root is Ife. One sacred city's workshops seeded a whole region's genius. When British soldiers carted the Benin bronzes off to London, they were looting, without knowing it, the grandchildren of the heads in the grove. So we end where we always end, with the question of why you didn't already know this. Part of the answer is the usual one. The textbooks that found room for every minor European prince somehow never found room for the Renaissance of West Africa. But part of the answer is more specific and worth saying plainly. Ife was actively explained away. The one moment its art seized the world's attention, in 1910, the headline was not "African Masterpieces Found." The headline was Atlantis. The discovery was famous. The credit was stolen in the same breath. It took most of a century, more digs, more heads, chemical analyses, art historians finally saying out loud that these belong beside the greatest portraiture on earth, for the record to be fully corrected. In 1948, when Ife heads were exhibited in London, critics stood in front of them and wrote, almost helplessly, that they ranked with the finest works of Greece and Italy. It only took 38 years and a retired continent to get there. So go back, one last time, to that grove in 1910. You are Frobenius, kneeling in the red earth, holding a perfect metal face in your hands. The priests of Ife are watching you. The city around you has been sacred for 1,000 years. The answer to your question, who made this, is everywhere. In the living king on his throne, in the patterns on the faces of the elders, in the very ground, which will keep offering up masterpieces for the next century to anyone willing to believe the obvious. You went looking for a lost civilization, story lovers, and you found one. It just was never lost. It knew exactly where it was the whole time. The bronzes of Ife are not the relics of Atlantis. They are better than that. Atlantis is a story about a brilliant civilization that vanished beneath the waves. Ife is the true story of a brilliant civilization that never vanished at all, whose king still reigns, whose festivals still fill the streets, whose faces, cast in metal 1,000 years ago, still look out from museum glass with that same unshakable calm, waiting patiently for the world to finish catching up.